The wind moaned across the prairie like a restless spirit, carrying dust and the faint smell of rain. Caleb McGraw stood on the porch of his ranch house, broad shoulders outlined by the glow of a lantern behind him. The boards creaked beneath his boots as he shifted his weight, staring at the road that snaked toward town. He hated waiting. Waiting meant thinking, and thinking led him back to the memories he tried to bury. The screams of cattle during a midnight raid, the acrid smoke of burning barns, the sound of his father's body hitting the ground. He spat into the dirt, as if that simple act could clear the bitterness from his mouth. Years of silence stretched around him. The ranch had acres of land, herds of cattle, and enough work to fill 3 men's lives, yet not enough to keep him from the gnawing emptiness that lingered when the sun went down. The war had taken some of his youth, the raiders had taken his family, and time had taken his patience. Loneliness was all that was left, whispering to him at night, louder than any wolf's howl. He needed more than work and whiskey. He needed someone to sit across the table, someone whose voice would fill the hollow spaces in his chest. That was why he had written the letter. A mail-order bride, promised to him by a company in the East, young and untouched, ready to start fresh. The idea had been strange at first, but the longer he stared at the empty chair in his kitchen, the more it seemed like salvation. He pictured her often in the weeks since he sent the money, small hands smoothing a dress, timid eyes glancing up at him, a shy laugh breaking the silence. Innocence, he told himself, could still exist even in a place as unforgiving as the West. Tonight, the stagecoach was due. His heart beat harder than he liked to admit. He adjusted his hat, tugging the brim lower to hide his face, as if the dark could disguise his nerves. Somewhere down the road, a lantern swung in the distance, bobbing like a will-o'-the-wisp. The clatter of wheels grew louder. Then the crack of the driver's whip echoed through the night. The coach lumbered into view, dust clouding behind it, horses snorting from the long ride. Caleb squared his shoulders, preparing himself for the first sight of her. He expected the girl from his imagination, pale, nervous, maybe with ribbons in her hair. But when the door opened, what stepped down was not a virgin bride. A woman in black descended slowly, her hands clutching a worn suitcase. Her veil fluttered in the night breeze, and when she lifted it, her face was pale but not young. Her eyes, large and rimmed with shadows, held grief so raw it seemed carved into her. Caleb's jaw tightened. This was no blushing bride. This was a widow. She moved with care, her posture too proud to be meek but too burdened to be free. For a moment, they stared at each other across the space of the yard, silence heavy between them. The driver muttered something about a long trip and tipped his hat before climbing back onto the coach. The wheels rattled away, leaving only the woman and her suitcase at Caleb's feet. He spoke first, his voice low and gravelly. "You ain't what I ordered." Her grip on the suitcase trembled, but her chin lifted with stubborn resolve. "And you ain't what I expected, either." The words struck him harder than he thought they would. He had prepared for shyness, for hesitation, for the fragility of someone stepping into a strange land. He had not prepared for defiance, or for the sight of tears glistening in the lantern light, unshed but threatening. She looked as though she had walked out of mourning straight into his life, carrying secrets heavier than the trunk she bore. He cleared his throat, scratching at the stubble on his jaw, suddenly unsure of the next step. A widow was not part of the bargain. A widow carried history, attachments, memories of another man. He wanted newness, a chance unspoiled by the past. Yet here she was, standing in his yard, the deal already done and the silence between them thick enough to choke on. The horses in the corral shifted restlessly, as though they, too, felt the weight of the moment. Caleb looked past her, out into the night, half expecting the coach to return and take her away. It did not. She remained, steady despite the flicker of emotion in her eyes. Something about her stillness unsettled him more than if she had burst into tears or begged him for kindness. She didn't look like a woman asking to be saved. She looked like a woman daring him to decide. He forced himself to breathe, the air dry in his throat. This was not the life he had planned. But the West rarely gave a man what he asked for. Sometimes it only gave him what was left. He turned toward the house, his boots crunching against the dirt. Without looking back, he muttered, "Well, come inside, then." The suitcase scraped softly as she lifted it, footsteps following his. The night closed in behind them, and the prairie stretched out, vast and silent. For the first time in years, Caleb's house would no longer echo, with only his own footsteps. But as he shut the door, the uneasy thought struck him. Silence broken by another's presence was not always peace. Sometimes it was the start of something far more dangerous. And as Sarah, though he did not yet know her name, crossed his threshold, her tears catching the lamplight, he wondered if he had invited salvation into his home, or trouble that would tear it apart. Morning crept over the plains with a pale, gold light that made the horizon look endless. Caleb rose early, as he always did, shrugging into his work shirt before the rooster had finished crowing. The smell of coffee drifted faintly from the kitchen, though the taste told him Sarah had brewed it without knowing the right proportions. It was thin, bitter, and burnt all at once. He said nothing, only tipped his hat in her direction before stepping outside of the corral. She watched him go, her hands folded around the cup, as though it were an anchor in unfamiliar waters. The house felt strange with her in it. For years it had been a place of silence, where every chair sat empty but his own, every plate unused, every sound a reminder of absence. Now her presence broke that rhythm. Her footsteps across the floorboards, the rustle of skirts, the clink of crockery. None of it felt natural yet, and he wasn't sure whether it was comfort or irritation that stirred inside him. Outside, the ranch waited, vast and demanding. Caleb showed her around after breakfast, his words curt but deliberate. He pointed to the barn, to the fencing that stretched across the fields, to the cattle grazing in the distance. She followed closely, careful not to let her shoes sink too deep into the mud. When a chicken flapped too near, she startled, nearly dropping the basket she carried. Caleb smirked despite himself, the sound of her gasp sharp in the morning air. "You will get used to them," he muttered. Her lips tightened, as though she wanted to reply, but swallowed the words. He noticed the way her eyes lingered on everything with quiet caution, as though she were cataloging every detail for survival. The days unfolded with awkward rhythm. She cooked, though sometimes poorly. She tried to mend clothes, but pricked her fingers more than the cloth. He caught her once standing by the window long after dusk, her face tilted toward the fading light, lips moving in a prayer he couldn't hear. At night, when the house was otherwise quiet, he sometimes woke to the sound of muffled weeping. Once, instead of sobs, it was a soft, trembling song that floated through the hallway. Her voice was fragile but steady, a hymn that carried sorrow like water carries reflections. Caleb lay awake listening, the sound settling somewhere deep in the part of him he usually kept sealed. Yet he reminded himself of his disappointment. He had not asked for a widow, not asked for a woman burdened with loss. He wanted someone untouched by grief, someone who might soften the edges of his own past instead of mirroring them. The frustration simmered beneath his ribs, flaring whenever she met his silence with her own. One evening, as they ate stew by lamplight, he finally asked, "You going to tell me your name?" Her spoon paused, hand trembling slightly. "Sarah," she said, barely above a whisper. "Sarah what?" "Just Sarah." Her gaze did not lift from the bowl. He grunted, pushing his plate away. Secrets, he thought, always came with weight, and she was carrying more than most. The following week, unease grew on the ranch. Caleb noticed tracks near the northern fence, hoof prints too fresh to belong to his cattle. One morning, he found the latch on the barn loosened, though nothing had been stolen. He knew the signs. Riders were scouting, watching, weighing the place. The memory of past raids clawed at him, and for the first time in years he oiled his rifle, setting it by the door. Sarah noticed his vigilance. "Is something coming?" she asked, her voice low. "Maybe," he said. "Don't matter. If it does, I'll handle it." Her eyes searched his face, as though trying to measure the truth behind his confidence. She said nothing more, but that night the weeping returned, muffled under her blanket. Days passed with a tension neither of them named. Caleb watched the horizon when he worked, alert to every flicker of movement. Sarah tended the house, her silence punctuated by occasional attempts at conversation that fell flat against his gruff replies. Yet in small ways, she began to find footing. She surprised him by carrying water from the well without complaint, by scolding a stubborn mule until obeyed, by patching a tear in his sleeve with stitches that, while crooked, held firm. Still, he could not ignore the distance between them. The evenings were heavy, thick with unsaid words. One night, after the cattle had been restless all day, Caleb found her standing on the porch, her veil tucked away, her hair catching the lantern glow. She turned to him with eyes bright from unshed tears. "You think I don't notice," she said softly. "The way you watch the fences, the way you grip that rifle. You're waiting for something." Caleb leaned against the post, arms folded. "I've learned better than to be caught sleeping." Her lips quivered, but she forced the words out. "So have I." For a moment, silence stretched between them, filled only by the creak of wood and the distant cry of a coyote. Caleb felt something shift in her gaze, a shadow breaking into fragile honesty. He wanted to ask, but the question caught in his throat. He told himself he didn't care, but the truth pressed harder with every glance she gave him. That night, her song returned, softer than before, carrying through the thin walls. It was not just sorrow this time. There was defiance in the notes, a strength rising through the grief. Caleb sat at the edge of his bed, the rifle across his lap, listening as though each wordless phrase carved into him. By the time dawn bled into the sky, he had decided he would not let the ranch fall as it had before. Yet when he stepped into the kitchen, he found her already waiting, her eyes rimmed red but steady. She set down a cup of coffee, stronger than the last time, and looked at him with a resolve that made his chest tighten. "You should know," she said quietly. "My husband was killed by the same men who killed your family." The word struck like a gunshot, cutting through every wall he had built. He froze, staring at her, the pieces of her sorrow suddenly fitting into place. The air between them shifted, no longer filled with distance, but with the echo of a wound they both carried. And for the first time since she had stepped off that coach, Caleb understood that the stranger in his home was bound to him by more than a bargain, by blood spilled on the same trail. The confession lingered between them like smoke after a gunshot, refusing to clear. Caleb said nothing at first, the weight of her words pressing down on him harder than the memory of the raid itself. Sarah's eyes did not waver, though her hands were clenched tight around the edge of the table, knuckles pale in the lantern light. She had revealed more than a secret. She had tied her pain to his in a knot that could not be undone. For days, the knowledge altered the air in the house. They moved with new awareness, cautious but tethered. Caleb found himself watching her more closely, not out of suspicion but recognition. Her grief mirrored his own, and in that mirror he saw pieces of himself he had tried to bury. When she hummed as she worked, he caught fragments of sorrow that matched the weight in his chest. When she prayed at dusk, her words carried the same desperation he had felt when he buried his father. Still, intimacy did not come easily. Their conversations remained sparse, but the silences grew different, less hostile, more shared. Caleb began inviting her to ride the fence line with him, handing her the gentlest of his horses. She sat awkwardly in the saddle at first, skirts bunched, face pinched with concentration. But by the third ride, she held her reins with steadier grip, her veil gone, hair tugged free by the wind. For a fleeting moment, Caleb almost smiled, realizing she looked more alive on horseback than she ever had in the shadowed kitchen. The land itself seemed to test them, as though measuring whether their fragile bond could hold. A storm swept over the plains one afternoon, splitting the sky with jagged lightning. Together they rushed to drive the cattle to safety, rain lashing their faces, mud sucking at their boots. Sarah stumbled but did not fall, her hands raw from a rope she gripped. When at last the herd was penned, both of them soaked and shivering, Caleb saw fire in her eyes that demanded respect. She was no delicate bride meant to soften his solitude. She was steel tempered by loss, and he could not ignore it. But shadows did not lift so easily. Riders had been seen again near the ridge, circling like vultures. Caleb found fresh boot prints by the creek one morning, and that night the barn smelled of smoke before flames licked at the rafters. They managed to douse it before the fire spread, but the message was clear. The outlaws were close. Caleb cleaned his rifle with practiced motions, jaw clenched. Sarah sat across from him, mending a shirt that no amount of stitching could truly save. "You've faced them before," she said, her tone steady but her voice low. "Not these same men," he answered, "but men like them. Always men like them." Her hands paused. The needle caught midair. "One of them took my husband's pocket watch. I saw in his hand before he—" Her throat tightened, but she forced the words through. "If they come again, I'll know him." Caleb's gaze lifted to her face. She was not trembling. Not this time. There was fire there, the kind born from loss too great to bear silently. He realized she wasn't only mourning. She was waiting for reckoning. The nights grew tense. Caleb slept little, his ear trained for hoofbeats or voices. Sarah's singing returned, but now it carried a different current. It was no longer only grief. It was defiance, a song sharp enough to steady a man's hand. One evening, he found himself lingering at the doorway, watching her hum as she kneaded bread. For the first time, the corners of his mouth tugged into something dangerously close to a smile. "You're terrible at stitching," he said suddenly, nodding at the crooked seam she'd made earlier. Her eyes widened, then narrowed in mock indignation. "And you're worse at coffee. At least my stitches hold together." It was the first spark of humor to pass between them, awkward but alive. Caleb shook his head, muttering something under his breath that made her laugh. An unfamiliar sound in the house, startling yet warm. The sound echoed in him long after it faded, as though she had struck a chord he hadn't known still existed. Yet the levity did not last. Tracks were found again near the southern edge, and one of the ranch hands Caleb occasionally hired came by with word. The outlaws had been seen in town, drinking, boasting of unfinished business. Caleb's hand tightened around the rifle stock, old anger rising like bile. That night, the tension broke in a different way. Sarah sang by the fire, the hymn low and steady, her voice trembling but unyielding. Caleb sat across from her, his rifle leaning against the hearth, listening with a heaviness that was both painful and healing. He realized she wasn't singing for herself alone. She was singing for him, too, for the silence that had ruled his nights, for the ghosts that lingered in both their hearts. When the last note faded, he spoke without thinking. "That voice ain't just breaking my silence. It's saving me." Her eyes lifted to his, wide with something he could not name. For a heartbeat, neither moved, the fire casting flickering light across their faces. Then outside, the sharp crack of gunfire split the night. Caleb was on his feet instantly, rifle in hand, the warmth of her gaze replaced by the chill of danger. Sarah clutched the edge of the table, breath caught in her throat. He glanced back at her once, a silent promise in his eyes. The war was coming to his doorstep again, and this time he was not alone. The night split open with a report of gunfire, sharp and merciless, echoing across the open land. Caleb moved with instinct, snatching his rifle and shoving the door wide, the cold air rushing in like a slap. Dark shapes shifted near the corral, their torches burning like the eyes of predators. Horses stamped and whinnied, panic spreading through the herd. The outlaws had come at last, shadows with familiar malice in their movements, and Caleb's pulse thundered with both rage and grim anticipation. Sarah was behind him, her breath uneven but her stance steady. She did not cower. She did not plead. Instead, she reached for the shotgun propped near the door, her hands shaking only until her fingers closed around the stock. Caleb spared her a quick glance, half warning, half respect, and then he stepped into the yard, boots sinking into the damp earth. The outlaws shouted, their laughter rolling across the dark like a cruel game. Bullets tore through the night, splintering wood, grazing the porch post near Caleb's head. He ducked low, sighted, and fired. One man tumbled from his horse with a scream. The others cursed and spread wide, circling, their torches painting streaks of light against the black sky. The ranch, once so quiet, erupted into chaos. Sarah fired from the porch, the blast rocking her shoulder back, but her aim true enough to scatter the men drawing closer. Caleb felt something hot surge his chest. Not fear, not quite pride, but a fierce recognition that she was no helpless passenger in this fight. She was fire, her grief sharpened into resolve. They pressed forward. Caleb rolled behind the trough, gunpowder thick in his nose, heart pounding as he counted his shots. A horse screamed nearby, hit by stray fire, and the acrid smell of smoke followed. The barn roof had caught, flames licking upward, orange light washing the yard in hell's own glow. Caleb's chest clenched, memories clawing back. The last time he had seen fire rise like that, his family's shouts drowned by crackling wood. But this time, he swore it would not end the same. An outlaw charged, teeth bared, pistol raised. Caleb dropped him with a clean shot, but another replaced him, shouting curses. From the porch, Sarah's voice rang out, not words, but a sound sharp with defiance as she fired again. The blast forced the man back, stumbling into the dirt. Caleb surged up, striking him down before he could rise. The fight dragged in flashes of light and thunder, bullets and smoke, each moment stretched in with peril. Caleb fought with grim precision, the rhythm of battle old and familiar. Yet it was different now. He was not fighting alone, and every time he glanced toward the porch, Sarah's figure steadied him. Her veil was gone, her hair wild in the firelight, her face fierce. Then came a voice that froze them both. "Well, look who we got here, the widow." One outlaw rode closer, grinning cruelly, a gold chain glinting around his neck. Dangling from it was a pocket watch, battered but unmistakable. Sarah's breath caught audibly, her entire body tensing. "That was mine," she said, her voice raw, broken open with fury. The man sneered. "Was. Now it's a trophy." Caleb raised his rifle, but before he could fire, Sarah stepped forward, shotgun braced against her shoulder. The blast rang out, shattering the night. The outlaw fell backward from his horse, the watch spilling into the dirt with him. For a heartbeat, silence reclaimed the yard, broken only by the crackle of the burning barn. The remaining riders faltered, their bravado withered as they counted their fallen, their torches wavering. Caleb fired once more, a warning shot that sent sparks in the ground at their horses' hooves. Panic broke them, and they wheeled away into the night, leaving the ranch littered with bodies, smoke, and the stench of blood. The flames still roared, threatening to consume the barn entirely. Caleb and Sarah rushed to salvage what they could, hauling water, beating back sparks. The effort left them blackened with soot, their lungs raw. But together they dragged the last of the flames down until only smoldering ash remained. When at last the night quieted, the ranch lay battered but standing. Caleb leaned on the well, chest heaving, sweat and soot streaking his face. Sarah stood a few paces away, the shotgun slack in her hands, the chain of the pocket watch glinting faintly at her feet. She bent slowly, picked it up, and held it to her chest. Tears welled, but this time they did not fall in weakness. They burned like a cleansing fire. Caleb watched her, the enormity of the night settling over him. "You fought like hell," he said, his voice rough. She looked at him then, truly looked, and something unspoken passed between them. Not gratitude, not relief. Something deeper. Recognition of two lives broken in different ways, now welded by fire and blood. "I didn't come here to be saved," she whispered. "But maybe I came here to save you." The words cut through him, stripping away the armor he had worn for years. He stepped closer, his hand finding hers, rough palm against trembling fingers. For a long moment they stood in the ruined yard, the stars spread endless above them, the ashes of the barn at their feet. "I thought I wanted innocence," Caleb said, voice low. "But what I needed was someone who's already walked through fire. Someone who could stand with me in the silence and not be afraid." Sarah's grip tightened, her gaze steady despite the shimmer of tears. "Then maybe we were both wrong about what we ordered." A faint laugh escaped him, the first in years, broken but real. And for the first time, the silence around them felt less like emptiness and more like peace. The dawn broke slow, painting the land in soft hues. The ranch stood scarred but unbroken, much like its inhabitants. Caleb and Sarah moved together through the wreckage, weary but alive, bound now by more than loss. And as the sun lifted higher, a voice, half memory, half narration, seemed to rise with it. Asterisk loneliness drove a man to send for a stranger. Grief brought a widow to his door. But in the wild, where gunfire echoes and silence can break a soul, they found something stronger than survival. They found each other. Asterisk. If this story moved you, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share your thoughts in the comments.